Digitel is one of the leading companies for live streaming events, running corporate virtual events, or managed webinars. If you're looking to reach worldwide markets or generate revenue from adding a virtual component to your meetings and conferences, leverage Digitel's 33 years of experience in creating flawless online events. For more information, go to digitellinc.com or email them at contactus@digitel.com.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna call the Adler.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are again.
Yes, today our guest is Priya Parker, the founder of Thrive Labs. She just published a book, The Art of Gathering, that aims to put a framework around how we think about events, from why we have them to, through her lens, make them better. And David, I know that the themes and her vision in this book really spoke to you.
Oh, yes. No, everybody's sort of maybe even tired of me saying that event organizers have to be thought of as collaboration artists or programmers of human interaction. And it's not just about all the logistics and how to get the trains to run on time, but the feeling. It's coming down to Maya Angelou. It's not what you say, it's how you made them feel.
We've all been to events that have not been good experiences. And, we've been to events that leave us just invigorated and thrilled and are the best of their type. And she is really going to dig into why each of those outcomes happen, and then what our listeners as event organizers can do to ensure that they stay away from the boring events and instead go into the memorable events.
This interview we had is probably one of the most inspirational that I've heard. And I look forward to sharing this with our listeners today.
Then let's get to it. Welcome to GatherGeeks.
Thank you for having me.
Well, your book, The Art of Gathering, just came out. And the title almost makes it sound like it's a coffee table book, but really it is very much a practical guide for people. And I'm wondering, when and how did you get the idea for this book?
So the subtitle is How We Meet and Why It Matters. And I got the idea of the book in part because I was frustrated by going to a variety of different events where whether it's a dinner party and the table was beautiful and the food was spectacular and people left feeling a little bit sort of hollow and empty and not connected to each other, or conferences where perhaps the speakers were great, but again, people who were actually at the conference didn't connect or feel inspired by each other, and kept basically asking, why is this? And from my perspective, a lot of the gathering wisdom and guidance that we've turned to over the last few decades have been outsourced primarily to people who are kind of experts in food and recipes and flowers, even etiquette. And not that those aren't part of a gathering, but to have that disproportionate focus on it is a missed opportunity to actually focus on people. And so I wanted to write a book that didn't focus on the things of gathering, but rather the people. And coffee table books in part are so attractive because things are visual, whereas the interaction and meeting between people are much harder to describe unless you were there.
Right. And you're coming at this from a different perspective. You at Thrive Labs, you're working on corporate and nonprofit gathering strategy, but more than that as well. But your bio also says you've worked on race relations on college campuses, peace in the Middle East. So there's a lot of conflict resolution. So what do these things have in common, and how did that shape your perspective working on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I come to this primarily as a conflict resolution facilitator. So my profession is in group conflict resolution. I worked first in my career as a college student and then as a graduate on race relations on college campuses in a process called sustained dialogue. It was founded by a former diplomat, Hal Saunders, and he was the crafter, one of the co-creators of the Camp David Accords, peace between Egypt and Israel. And he was obsessed with the interaction of people in a group. sort of the technology of group relations. And he was my mentor. So I worked, the reason I was in the Middle East for different dialogues is because at 70 and 80 years old, he was always curious about and supported young people. And so I came into this world through conflict resolution that looked at how does a group transform its relationships, not between two people, so like marriage counseling or business partner counseling, but the dynamics and the messiness of group life. And I wrote this book, and my lens on this book is really trying to help people think more like a facilitator.
But you've actually broadened what event organizing is about by this. And have you seen any results in terms of how people react to this? Did they say, oh, wow, this is right?
Absolutely. And I think, part of helping people see things afresh is by changing the language that we use. And for better or for worse, perhaps, 30 or 40 years ago, if we used event organizing, people might think, wow, what is that? But now it's an entire field and an industry. And unfortunately, we have, certain archetypes that goes with what we think an event organizer is or does.
Yeah, we have the worst of that, party planner.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like the 4-letter word for what we do. And like you want to pull your hair out when you hear that. But the smart strategic planners, the strategic facilitators are using the new methodology of, I call it how to be a collaboration artist.
Absolutely.
And that's why when I saw this article on you in New York Times the other day, I said, oh my God, this is exactly what we're about.
Absolutely. I mean, the core DNA of event planning to me is the radical engagement of people for a temporary moment in time. And I think that the best people in this field and outside of the field think about how can I create a magical, memorable experience for a group of people that will move them in some way. And unfortunately, in part because when you're working with a client or in a corporate context, depending on when you're being brought in, the train is already kind of moving, and you have to focus and very quickly get kind of stuck into the logistics role. And to me, the most important thing to start with a gathering, even when you're brought in at the third step or, once everything's moving, is to pause and say, what is the purpose of this gathering? Because in part, many times when we don't ask that purpose, we quickly get to the form of what we think something should look like, and it actually doesn't match the need of the people.
And when you say purpose, I notice in your book, as I'm underlining every word, basically, how do you get people to understand the purpose? I know that you have to dig.
You have to dig.
And so what is the methodology to get someone listening today to say, what is the purpose of my event, and how can I really make it more strategic?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is actually to pause our mindsets and our frameworks about our assumptions of a purpose of an event. So I say that first because asking the purpose of something is a very easy thing to do. We don't do it because we think it's obvious. So the first thing I'd say is, no matter what, ask the purpose of the event. So for example, if somebody says, we want to have an ideas festival, ask why. If we want to have a 50th anniversary or a 70th celebration of the founding of our company, ask why. Ask what for. Ask who is this for. I write about a gathering in the book that I don't name the company, but it was a 250th celebration of a company. And I was invited as a guest, unfortunately, for the company. And it was this, multi-million-dollar rollout of events all over the world. And when the one in New York happened in Lincoln Center, and it was sort of spectacular in terms of the fireworks, and there were movement artists going through the space, and the food was sort of delicate and perfect, and they had the waiters come out a la Française style. But the entire thing had no logic and no story and didn't connect people. And the entire audience there, dressed in black tie, frankly, at the end of the night, felt quite used. And even for that, I think part of the reasons we skip the question about purpose is because if you hear, oh, it's a 250th anniversary celebration, we think we know what that is for. But is it to honor the founders? Is it to honor the future? Is it to honor the vision? Is it to honor the specific product? Is it to bring together a company? Is it to find new clients? Is it to increase your followership on Instagram? I mean, your purpose can be crass, but you should know what it is.
Mm-hmm. But how do you get to that? How do you get the
first thing
organizer to that?
is you basically say, what is this for? What is this for? And they'll probably look at you and laugh. And so the second thing is to ask the question again, what is this for? And then, so for example, if it's right now, a lot of companies want to get into the conference business. It's kind of, it's a trend. More and more people realize it's a way to kind of build a brand and get new clients. So if you are working with somebody and they say, we want to have a conference, the first thing is literally to ask why. And they say, because it's kind of what everybody's doing. All the media companies are now doing it. I want to have a conference. Okay, so, but why do you want to have a conference? What is the need that you're trying to solve for? I don't really know if we have a need. Then don't plan a conference, right? So part of this is guiding people to figure out what is the right format for an event. And when a gathering doesn't fulfill a need, it's very difficult to make it matter.
Is the purpose different from the message?
Yes. So the purpose might be totally invisible. You may never tell anybody what the purpose is. It may just be felt through the design of the gathering. Whereas a message might be the name or the tagline or the hashtag of a conference or of a gala. The purpose is really the animating force of why you're doing what you're doing, why you're bringing people together. And one way is to kind of zoom in. So if people want to have a conference, get them to actually focus on what it is they want to have a conference for. And conference with kind of vague themes when they invite everybody is rarely a good conference. And so I encourage my clients to always be extremely explicit and specific, to have a conference that's disputable, and to have a purpose that's disputable. So for example, if you were to host a conference that said, MIT, I think Media Lab a few years ago hosted a conference, and I think it was something called Illegal Research, Illegal and Unethical. And it was this fascinating conference because even by hosting the conference, researchers had to decide if they wanted to be seen there. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. Can we show up, and does it mean that we are for this issue? But it was memorable and interesting, and it kind of, and people disagreed about whether or not you should even have this. That's an interesting purpose.
Right. It can be provocative.
What happens if you're provocative in the marketing of it, but you're not delivering it in the execution of it? Do you see that a lot as well?
Hugely. And I see that in a lot of brands. I remember, this isn't a gathering, but the biggest example that always sticks with me is the United Airlines ad from maybe 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember it or not, but all of the staff of United Airlines is like sitting in a boardroom or in a meeting room, waiting, and you see the clock ticking, and it kind of went out 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. And then at 59 minutes, the CEO walks in and he says, and everyone's angry. And he says, welcome to how it feels right now to ride United Airlines. And as a marketing campaign, it was awesome, right? Everybody got really excited, like, wow, they realized that they're creating this terrible experiences on the airlines. They're going to change it. But the problem was they didn't change the experience. They didn't embody the message of the marketing. And so people got even more angry. I think of an airline, I think of an air flight as a gathering. Like if I was advising an airline company, every time people get into your plane, it's an experience. They enter, there's an opening, they walk in, there's a physical experience. Some people are talking to strangers and having the most beautiful conversations of their lives. Less so now that everyone's on their tech. There's an exit. And similarly with a conference or with any type of event you're planning, if the marketing is provocative and then you walk in and it's not embodied, it's actually a breaking of the social contract.
So you can put this event framework around so many things that you don't even think of as events. You identify a lot of almost barriers to entry, like in terms of people not holding events and things that maybe frighten them or scare them away. Can you tell us what some of those are?
Absolutely. I think that in part because for 30 or 40 years, we've been part of what I jokingly call the Martha Stewart School of Gathering. It's become very intimidating to gather. And this is particularly true in kind of our personal lives and our social lives, that you have to have the right canapés and crudités.
Well, yeah, you're vulnerable. I mean, you're naked to the world when you do an event.
And that will always be true, right? So you're naked to the world, but you have to also know how to cook, and you have to know how to set a table. And in the, more traditionally, you had to know the right etiquette. Right. And I think and so I think in part because you are naked to the world, we've kind of focused our anxieties on the things of gathering. We focus our anxieties on getting the perfect stew, rather than figuring out what are we going to do with the people in our midst once they're actually in the living room. And so I wrote this book in part to I really believe everybody can gather. It's like one of my favorite movies is Ratatouille. I don't know if you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone can cook. And I really think that everyone can gather. And I think in part with the events industry, specifically, I think it's one of the most powerful and important fields in the world. And I think that because decisions get made when people come together, future alternative possibilities are imagined when people come together, conflict can be resolved or created when people come together, and you're asking to design the shape and the space of what will happen in human interaction when they actually arrive. But we need to make sure we think of ourselves in that way.
Even extroverts, you point out.
Even extroverts. And I think, one of the things I say in the book is you don't have to be an extrovert. You don't need to have a fancy house.
Yeah. Even introverts.
Even introverts. You don't, for this book, I interviewed over 100 gatherers, my language, not theirs. So I interviewed a rabbi. I interviewed a camp counselor of a Jewish Arab summer camp. I interviewed a Japanese tea ceremony master, a dominatrix, photographers, like advisors to multi-generation family businesses. And one of the things that I found as I spoke to them, as I spoke to others, is a lot of the best gatherers suffer from social anxiety. And one of the reasons their gatherings are excellent is because they have the empathy to understand what people feel at the extreme when they come into an environment where they have to interact with others. And usually people who suffer from social anxiety are incredibly astute with the right amount of structure to add to a space.
Do you feel that that as you do more gatherings and you have the social anxiety, it lessens?
I think it lessens over time, but at least for me, it's taken many years to not sort of shake before a gathering. And I also think that, I'm a professional facilitator. My core work is creating complicated conversations between leaders at kind of transition points in their company. And I've done this for over 15 years, and I still feel kind of sick, the 2 to 3 hours before a gathering, before an engagement. And part of me, when I don't, I get a little worried,
right?
Because we care.
Well, also the funny thing is I always say to people that just to hold your hand out and say, hello, my name is David Adler, provokes such social anxiety for a lot of people.
Or them.
In me too.
Yeah.
So you have to push yourself to do it. And
Completely.
One of the things you say in the book, it says, ask not what your country can do for your gathering, but what your gathering can do for your country.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I think that gatherings that start to think about how do you actually touch on or begin to approach social ails are underrepresented in the things that we think we can actually do. And so, and this could be in a humble way. So for example, in a neighborhood where, that's quickly gentrifying, and I'm making this up, but all of the restaurants are kind of corporate owned. And you think, what is this country? And then you zoom in, what does this neighborhood need? And you may think, I'm a chef, and I think what this neighborhood need more than anything is raw, granular community. And so I'm going to think the way I know how to do it, my gift is cooking. And the way I know how to do that is to start a family-owned restaurant, and figure out how to meet rents that match, an Applebee's or a Chipotle. And then specifically in the way that they would start the restaurant to actively make, design your tables so that everybody is sitting together at a table. I'm making this up. But
this is part of your purpose. It's creating your purpose in what event that you do so that it has some relevance.
Absolutely. Or like borrow, one of my favorite people that I researched in this book is a man named Theodore Zeldin. I think he's now in his 80s. He's an English philosopher. And for many of his birthdays through his 70s, he would invite the entire United Kingdom to join him and his for a birthday party in, I think it was Regent's Park. Don't quote me on that. And he would call it a feast of strangers. And hundreds of people would show up. and there'd be, tables on the grass. And rather than food, it's totally free. I mean, you have to figure out how to get the tables. Rather than food, there'd be a menu of conversations. And for every entree, every course, there'd be questions. So the fish course would be something like, what's your relationship to money? Or what have you rebelled against in the past? And what are you rebelling against now? And they'd pair up two strangers across from each other. And for every course, quote unquote, they'd answer these kind of very high risk, provocative, interesting questions. What if you in your neighborhood decided that the thing that this neighborhood needed was restitching together? Maybe it's a racially diverse neighborhood. Maybe it's a politically diverse neighborhood. What if you did a conversational menu as the menu in your restaurant? That becomes interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned common thing that you see people doing wrong, and it's having an event without knowing why they're having the event. What's another thing you've identified that is that's going wrong or that needs to change in terms of bringing people together?
Yeah. And I'll just say one thing is I bristle at the idea that there's like a wrong way and a right way to do a gathering. What I'm really trying to shift is the mindset of how we approach what this thing is. So to answer your question, I think another thing that we misunderstand is when to include and when to exclude. And I think we over-include. In a spirit of trying to be generous, I think we misunderstand the idea of the more the merrier.
Can you dig deeper on that?
Absolutely. So
okay.
I think that the more is usually the scarier or the hairier, in part because we tend to invite people out of either obligation or shoulds or habit rather than thinking about who actually needs to be there. And so, for example, I was facilitating a global worldwide meeting for a company. They had just hired a new CEO, and the CEO was trying to find, I won't say which gender, their new feet. And it was the first time the CEO was kind of coming out to the entire global company. And at the last minute, and it was this CEO's kind of thing. And at the last minute, they got a casual email from the founder who just wanted to stop by and be, part of the proceedings. And the CEO's instinct was to say yes, because it's very awkward to say no. And I said, the founder is absolutely not allowed to be here. And the CEO, at the core of the CEO, they agreed. They felt very odd having them stay there, but they didn't know how to say no. And so in that case, the founder coming would actually both shift the power dynamics, and at a time where they're trying to talk about the future and break away from the past, sends very complicated messages. When anybody is in the room, once they're actually in the room, if you're a good host, you act with the spirit of generosity and you include each person. And so you have to kind of handle the dynamics of whoever you're bringing in. And so whoever you bring in, one, do it with purpose, but two, exclude with purpose. And so in that case, we explicitly had to say, hey, you have a lot of power in this organization. You symbolize a lot of stuff that's bigger than you. And we actually need to do this gathering without you. And, to the founder's credit, they understood, they got it. But we're often not willing to have the complicated conversations, in part because we have a queasy feeling. It doesn't feel like that person should be there, but we don't really know why. And then even if we know why, it can be complicated or awkward to say no.
So one of the chapters that you have is don't be a chill host. Now, what does that mean?
So I think that chillness and this kind of idea that, everyone should just chillax and kind of look like they don't care might be helpful, when you're at home watching Netflix. I am deeply encouraging you to Netflix and chill. But when it comes to gathering, this attitude is a very dangerous idea. Gathering is a form of power, and it's also a form of love. And being chill is both abdicating your power, and it's also not taking care of people.
Invest in yourself and your staff with self-paced online event education designed to fit into your busy schedule. Subscribe to the Event Leadership Institute for only $25 per month and gain access to an extensive on-demand video library of classes, as well as interviews with industry leaders. Best of all, you can watch classes in small pieces or all at once. For more information, visit eventleadershipinstitute.com.
So we had our conference in Florida, and yesterday 2 days ago. And one of the things I do as a host is I go to every single table and I welcome people and thank people.
I love that.
And I have seen it at the State Department when the Prime Minister of England goes to every single table. And I believe that CEOs are now terrible hosts. And how do you sort of tell them that it's not about them, it's about their guest? So when I read this, it's about the chill of the CEO being terrible.
Totally.
And how do we change that?
Totally. You know, one of the people I interviewed for the book, there were 2 chapters that got cut at the last minute. So maybe there'll be secret chapters later on. But one was the power of the physical, the kind of the body in the room. And my key character is an Olympic hockey coach named Ralph Kruger. And he recently became a very unusual position, the chairman of a football league in the UK, Southampton. And one of the traditions that he was delighted to discover was that every morning when the team gathers for breakfast, the team, the assistant coach, the coach, everybody involved, before they go to get their buffet, their food, everybody shakes hands with everybody else in the room. And so if you're the first one there, you're fine. If you're the second one there, it takes a few minutes, a second. If you're the 36th person there, it takes a lot longer. But it's this kind of way they're hosting each other and they're connecting each other, and it's a ritual, but it's something that transforms the breakfast every day.
No, I think the physical is really important. I also believe that we need to bring back the receiving line in many cases, because when millennials walk into a room, sometimes they never even meet anyone.
Completely.
They never talk to anyone.
Completely.
So as an organizer,
completely,
I'm sure we both believe the same thing, that you have to sort of tell people, you have to actually orchestrate.
Completely. And I love the idea of the receiving line, because what I think today, I think what we need to do is refresh the receiving line for the new generation.
Yes.
And it's not to necessarily bring back the receiving line, though you can if it's authentic to the gathering that you're doing. If you're doing an old school gathering, bring back the receiving line. But I think what we need to do, and what innovation is looking at the value and the need that the receiving line fulfilled, and find a fresh way to do that.
Well, it's the ultimate selfie.
Yeah.
Perhaps if they want if they want that selfie. But you have to, it's about, I think not being a chill host is about respecting everybody's time as well, and saying I care that you're spending your time with us, and therefore I'm going to make sure that this day is structured. You're not going to see me relaxing, because it's my job to make sure that we're spending our time effectively together.
Yeah, and I think language is really important. So I think once you're actually in the room as a host, you should relax in terms of your comportment, and put down all of the things that you're doing, put down your logistics, put down your phone, and just be present and relax and breathe and be there. That said, I think if you think about the receiving line, to kind of go back to the metaphor, the receiving line, what did it do? It allowed every guest to meet the host, right? So in an old school format, it operated on an assumption of power of one to many. So what would be interesting now is, what is the modern day receiving line that allows for people to move from one to many to many to many, right? And so Jeremy Hyman's new book, New Power, talks a lot about how we're actually shifting power from two people, or from one-on-one, from hierarchical to basically distributed. And so similarly, what would the new power form of a receiving line look like? And I think it can look as like pop-up rules. So I have a chapter called basically Pop-up Rules Are the New Etiquette. And it looks at how we can design temporary rules for any gathering that are fun and playful, that quickly shift the dynamic. One of my favorite comes from an experienced designer named Anthony Rocco. Fascinating personal story. His father was an FBI agent, and he grew up in the Mormon church. And so he grew up both with ritual and shadow. And he's now one of the most talented experienced designers I've met. And he used to be a praxis facilitator for an underground secret society that was extremely controversial and has since imploded. It was a secret society that tried to get funding to scale. So it was just talk about conflicting purposes. But he created this rule at one of his secret societies that he told me about, where they had one rule when people walked in, because they wanted to have everybody meet but not have it feel cheesy. And the rule that he set was, you can't pour yourself your own drink.
Interesting.
So what does that do? if you think about it, it makes you pour other people drinks and makes them pour you a drink.
That's
and it
brilliant.
immediately flips the dynamic so that you're caring for others and that you actually have to ask somebody to pour your drink. And so I think to me, that's kind of the modern version,
Yeah,
a
that's
very
brilliant.
fresh, innovative way of what a receiving line used to do.
Yep. Because you talk about, we talk about the big buzzword everywhere is engagement. And you have these experienced designers who are creating these things that they think people are engaging in. Is marketing getting it wrong because they're creating these great, eye candy, but is it really working? I mean, some people are doing it well, some aren't, but
Right.
people don't even have the face-to-face experience.
Right.
And they're doing it based on things. Is it part of your
Yeah,
thinking?
I mean, I think, if you kind of step back and think about how the economy has and will continue to change, and Joseph Pine's experience economy kind of is the first person to frame it in a helpful way. We went from products to services to experiences, and we're now in the thick of that. You can see that millennials want experiences over products and services. They named it, they called it. And I think that, in a sense, the Anthony Rocco story is an example that I don't think you need to have, crazy fireworks and a $1 million budget to create a magical experience for people. I think you can be extremely creative to help people, engage in something interesting, very simply. But I think that certain props, and things can help depending on the purpose of the gathering. So one of my, I read this just in the New York Times. I wasn't there, but one of my favorite examples was when I think it was Star Wars. What was the last Star Wars movie? Star Wars Awakens or Star Wars?
The Han Solo movie just came out, right?
Like
Before
3 years
that-
ago. Anyway, all your listeners can be like, come on.
Yeah, I know they're going to be going crazy.
So at a Star Wars premiere, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, the invitations came out and said, one of the small details that I loved was instead of saying like there will be parking there, they said parking for your land cruisers will be provided, and your space jets. And it was this over the top premiere with all these costumes and crazy, props. But in the tiniest detail of the invitation, they embodied the spirit of why people are coming. And so in that case, I think it makes sense to have this kind of incredibly marketed, alternative world created of a Star Wars theme. But I don't think that should be our model for every gathering. I think you want to start with purpose.
Right. I mean, even the marketers that do experiential need to do more starting with purpose.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yes. Yeah. So it's not, to me, event planning is not a bag of tricks.
Yeah.
Event planning is a lens, and the lens is, what does this group of people need now?
Yeah, you say the temporary moment. You talk about the moment, how important that moment is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it doesn't happen again. This is you're talking about that.
Totally. So one of the people I interviewed, I mentioned, is a Japanese tea master, and there's a phrase, I guess, in the mastery of tea ceremony, which is a specific craft with a specific lineage, and it's ichigo ichi-e, and it means basically that this moment will never happen again in this way. I was in Kyoto and did a tea ceremony with this master, and it was a female master, and she said the idea is that even if you step into the same spot of a river a week from now, the river has changed, but so have you. And it's a similar idea with a gathering, which is you can even do the same thing every week. The power of ritual. It's not that you actually have to reinvent every time. It can actually be very beautiful to have rhythmic, repetitive gatherings. But that because we are changed and we are different, maybe something happened to me in the last week, or maybe maybe my parent died, or maybe I had a bad fight at work, and I'm bringing a different part of myself because of that. The second thing I'll just say is I write about this idea of creating a temporary alternative world. And I learned a lot in this book from talking to game designers, people who create games for a living. And in the game designing world, there's this idea of a magic circle. Do you know this?
I've heard of it. I can't say I'm an expert in it.
So it comes from a Dutch game designer almost a century ago, and it was popularized by Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman in their amazing book called Rules of Play. It's sort of like the canon. It's literally a door stopper. It's sort of the light blue cover, a canon of how do you actually design rules to get people to play games. And it's a fascinating read. And I interviewed Eric for this book. And one of the things that they popularized is this idea of a magic circle. And the idea is basically when you decide to play a game, so like let's play tag, or let's play bluff, or let's play, BS. I'm right. I have a lot of lying card games. The first thing that, a group of 3 or more people will do is say, okay, what rules do you play by? Right. And say, okay, the soccer ball, the tree is the post and the grass is the line, and everyone kind of agrees. And then we say start. And from that moment, everybody imagines this temporary alternative world that we agree to, that we're stepping into, and we behave differently for a specific moment of time. The game then becomes over. And sometimes you may say, okay, pause. I have a question. So then they step out of that magic circle and say, so when you said, I thought you said we were playing, that you could pick up the entire card, not just the top. Okay, got it. Okay, time back in. So you're literally jumping in and out of this make-believe space. And I believe every gathering operates the same way.
It's not unlike the Sapiens book, where the whole world is some sort of artificial construct.
But tell us more about how you think events are like that. What are we all agreeing to when we show up?
So I'll give you a specific example. So recently I had a conversation with the writer Jancy Dunn. She's an amazing writer. And she was talking to me about how can she make her dinner parties kind of more engaging. And I said, well, what do you need right now? Or what are you experiencing in your life? And she said, well, recently I was with a friend, I was hungry, and she cut me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich into triangles and cut off the crusts. And it amused me, and I felt really special. Long story short, she realized that what she needed was a gathering where she wanted to feel taken care of and wanted to take care of other moms. So I told her to give it a name, tell the story in the email, and invite them to come and create one rule. So the rule she created was, if you talk about your kids, you have to take a shot. And she invited them to the worn out mom's hootenanny. And she says, she writes in the piece, I've never had all 6 of my friends RSVP'd yes within an hour. They're so excited to kind of step into this world. And so what I mean by a temporary alternative world is, these are people who see each other in a lot of different contexts. But Jancy had an idea that she, as a host, decided to create a specific world. And when you create a specific world, you're asking people to activate one part of their identity. And so all of the people on that mailing list also have jobs, also, may play sports or have hobbies, but mother is one part of their identity. And so the first thing she's inviting them into, and they can say no, is tonight I want you to show up as the worn out mom part of yourself. Right? And so the world she's creating is activating that part of that identity primarily. It's not that other things don't kind of ripple underneath. And then the second thing is it's temporary because it's 3 hours. First of all, you don't have to go, right? If you don't like this idea, just say, no, I'm busy. But if you say yes, you're implying that you're saying yes to a social contract. Yes, I will enter into this world. Yes, I will play with you. And then the second thing is with any type of temporary alternative world, you want to think about where's the physical line where they're stepping into it. So in the case of her house, it was like the doorway. In the case of a picnic, it could be once you step onto the blanket. But allow people a physical threshold. Think about their physical journey into a space, and how do they pass into, like, from the world that they left and into the world that they came into. So one of the things, I don't know if she did this or not, but an example I gave her to do was when these women walk in to dig, most moms with young kids, I'm one of them, we have like all these random things in our purses, like dried out raisins or like packs of pears, like mushed up pears, or even like the stray bottle cap. And so I said, have them look through their purse and take out that one item, because everybody has one. Even if it's just the fact that it's a mess, and put it down in a basket and walk in. And there's a symbol that they're leaving this part of their mom part out, and they were going to walk in and be part of another world for a little bit, that they didn't have to worry about their kids. In fact, they'd be punished if they did.
So it's so funny that you're talking about, it's not about the things, but in this case, it's about the design is about the storytelling, not about the food or something like. It's not about the details of it that you would think that would be normal about an event.
Yeah.
But event design and experiential design is important.
Oh, it's extraordinarily
Yeah.
important. What I'm saying is it's not, I wouldn't say it's about the storytelling. Storytelling is a component of it. It's about the design of your event should match the purpose of your gathering. And the food and the drink are part of
It's
that.
part of the
and they
story.
should match the purpose. So in this case, I told her, do not cook, do not spend 3 days cooking, and do not have anyone else cook. Order takeout and say that you're ordering takeout in the email because it embodies the idea that you're worn out.
Wow.
Right? So
Yep.
I'm not saying
Yep.
ignore the food. I'm saying have it serve your purpose and spend time thinking about that purpose rather than, Martha Stewart has this 29-point party planning guide and
Yeah.
you read it and at least I feel exhausted by it. 3 out of the 29 steps have to do with people. And even that is logistical. Check in on RSVPs, send RSVPs, make your list. And one of the steps is literally something like, 1 day before, blanch your vegetables for the crudités, keep them in separate Ziploc bags and put them in your vegetable drawer.
Yeah.
I'm like exhausted just reading that.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I don't mean to pick on Martha Stewart, but the point is the emphasis has been completely distorted so that we have an assumption that this alternative world is only created by canapes or a special fizzy drink. I'm saying,
So why do they look so appealing though? What do we respond to when we see that though?
I think we respond to the idea of being taken care of delighting in being part of an alternative world, in the idea of escape. And all of those things are beautiful. So I'm not saying don't do them. I love canapes. I really do. I love beautiful drinks. I'm a total foodie. All I'm saying is that our archetype of gatherings and of hosting, unfortunately, in the American context, has come from a very specific 1950s to 1970s image of a woman in an apron holding a tray of martinis.
Yeah.
And I think it's problematic. Because gathering is a form of power and gathering is a form of love. And that image excludes a lot of people. And it's not, and it should be a choice. I mean, I'm very happy to wear an apron and hold a plate of martinis, but I want that to be one of 1,000 images we have when we say that we're gathering.
Mm-hmm. And what are your favorite gatherings that you've been to recently I know you talk about a lot in your fantastic book.
Yeah.
But you've seen it all now. So what events and what things have really sort of struck you recently?
That's a good question. So one gathering that I recently went to was a baby shower. And I think in part because I think most women kind of have baby showers, but we all slightly dread them. And because there's sort of a trope that goes along with them. And I said, do I really want to, pin the diaper on the baby and all of these things that we feel like we ought to do, but again, don't match the purpose of, why are we having a baby shower? Are we having it because we're scared of labor? Are we having it to honor the identity of a mother? Are we having it because our family of two, our couplehood is actually expanding to a family and we need a ritual that expands us to a family? And so I went to this baby shower where the setup was that everybody kind of milled around for a while, and it was men and women, and it was men to actually at this later, and then women at the beginning, and every woman was asked to bring a poem or a song or write a letter to the mother or the child, and went around and basically did that. But before, each of us, and we didn't know each other, each of us shared a story of how we knew the woman. And it was very simple. And it was very beautiful because as people started to speak from the heart and share some element of why they loved that person, we all learned something more about a different angle of the mother to be. But we also became kind of a collective hive of exchanging meaning and preparing a woman as she thinks about this new identity, and didn't get lost in the games that to me have become more about form than function.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that it's kind of about heart. We do a lot of Jeffersonian style dinner parties, and we're doing them for business. And it is amazing how it's not just for your dinner party anymore,
Yes.
but it really bonds this new group that get together.
Absolutely.
And so, what is your sort of sense of the Jeffersonian dinner party, and is there other formats that kind of work?
Yeah, I love the Jeffersonian dinner party, and I interviewed Jen McCrea for the book. She and Jeff Walker are like fantastic designers of experiences and hosts for experiences. And I think more and more, and particularly with the kind of rising generation of millennials, we're no longer saying meaning is for home, not for the workplace. And that's controversial in and of itself. There are some people that says, I don't want to share my entire life story with my colleagues. Like, work is work and home is home. And so that's a interesting position. Like, it's a juicy conversation and we should be having it. But I personally think that people and teams work much better together over the long run when they see more sides of each other and they connect. And so one of the models that I write about in the book and I love is also a structured model. It's called 15 Toasts, and it's something that I developed with a colleague of mine, Tim Lebrecht. And we were both members of the Global Agenda Council on new models of leadership. It's a mouthful, at the World Economic Forum. We were there for meetings in Abu Dhabi, so not Davos, but another meeting. And one of the things we noticed was that in all of these meetings, as we kind of go, and there's amazing people in the room, but everybody is kind of on this in this habit of kind of the elevator pitch or the stump speech of like, oh yeah, just like, yeah, I'm in my Series B, or this is so great, and my life is, my life is fabulous, and I was just in Rome, and all these things, and you can mirror it, right? That's the kind of danger of it. You kind of become yourself someone you loathe.
Right. It's not very vulnerable. It's the opposite.
It's not very vulnerable. And so we created this dinner the night before. We thought, can we hack the World Economic Forum in this like small little way? And invited 15 people from 15 different councils so that we'd kind of spread the love. And long story short, we designed this format with, my husband was there also, and he was part of the brainstorming. And we chose a theme and invited people to dinner, and it felt more like a wedding or a dinner party than a conference, lights, flowers, candles, all that. And the theme we chose was a good life, but you can choose any theme. And we said, what is a good life to you? And at some point in the night, you have to stand up, ring your glass, old school style, and give a toast. But the toast needs to be a story or an experience from some part of your life, some room you've been in that we haven't been in, that relates to the theme. And the only rule is that the last person has to sing their toast. And we did it. And it was beautiful. And halfway through the night, what was very interesting was people started talking about death. And the inverse of life is death. And what was interesting was, as we started talking about a good life, people started thinking about the darker sides that rarely come out in a context like this. And, people were crying, not only when they were giving a toast, but because they were so moved. And something changed in that room that night that realized, like, we are complicated people that are all playing roles, and roles are good, but we're all wearing masks. And sometimes those masks serve us, and sometimes they prevent us from actually talking about the things that matter.
Mm-hmm. Has this experience changed how you behave as a guest?
It's an awesome question. I'm a little complicated because I'm a professional facilitator, and so and my friends know that. So when I'm a guest, I'm like, I try to stay hands off. In part because I want to honor my friends, and they kind of know that I have a very strong opinion about how things should go. But that said, I wrote this book, and I particularly called it The Art of Gathering, not The Art of Hosting. And that's because I believe guests are completely powerful and transformative in any gathering. And anytime I go to a gathering, particularly when I am a guest, and it feels appropriate and people aren't connecting, I will often suggest a question for the table. And if people don't want to, it's fine. But I think guests, this is a very dramatic example, but I use it because I think it's very powerful, which is when James Foley was captured by ISIS. He was in captivity for a couple of years, along with 6 to 12 other foreigners. They were obviously treated, horrendously, tortured, all of that. And in his when he was beheaded, I read his obituary in the New York Times, and there's a small detail that, among everything else, deeply moved me. And it was this detail that said that he, among all of the captives, all of the people who were captured, they'd spend their day in this room. And he was the one that would always help them figure out what game to play. and find ways to entertain each other, and find everything from having them teach each other a skill to telling stories to making up, choosing paper and playing little games with each other. And there was a small detail that he grew up in a family that played a lot of games. And it's this radical example. It reminded me a little bit of Viktor Frankl's book. What's it called? In Search of Meaning, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
It reminded me of that book because I thought, here is somebody with the worst hosts in the world, right? ISIS. And he demonstrated to me the transformative power of being a guest.
That's amazing. Before we go, I want to know, did someone sing their toast at the end?
Always.
And the reason that everyone else put their hand up because they didn't want to have to sing their toast?
I imagine there's somebody who does, though, right?
In
there's
the
always
American
someone.
context, there's almost always like the underground singers.
Right.
There isn't always, but it's funny. I've done it in India before, and everybody wants to sing, so you kind of have to change the rule. So I changed, in that case, when I did 15 toasts, I changed it so that the first person volunteered, and then they got to choose the next person across the table. So you kind of distribute power in a different way.
Yeah.
But we've done like over 20 of these dinners all over the world, in Shanghai and South Africa, in Copenhagen and San Francisco and Vancouver, in New York. And the themes change, and the best themes are the darker themes. So
Really?
Rebellion, death, fear, scared of the dark, and people always sing. And sometimes I remember one and the rule is Chatham House rule. So you can talk about the experience and the stories, but you can't attribute it to a person. So I'm not breaking any rules here. So one dinner to fear, the final person, everybody invited had something to do with fear. One person was a emergency room doctor. One person was a hostage negotiator. Everybody who kind of dealt with that in some way or the other. And the last person to sing was the last person who gave a toast was an emergency room doctor, and he had a young kid and 3-year-old, and he sang "Let It Go." He said, if anyone who has children, you all know the words, and then all of the parents in the room, joined in. So often what happened, and I've had people sing like the actual toast, and I had a Finnish guy sing a toast in Abu Dhabi, and what was so delightful was he had a terrible voice and it was totally off key, and everyone was like very moved because you're showing yourself naked.
Yeah. Right. Well, the just simple for the Jeffersonian ones that we do, as simple as the storytelling of what was your first job.
Yes.
Gets people going.
Completely.
We did another one. So if people want to use these ideas on, who was your favorite teacher and why?
Yes.
And the through line goes all the way to today. And you see how powerful these stories about people are.
And particularly questions that get people to talk about anything that happened to them before they were 20.
Yep.
That just opens up the world.
Yep.
Well, your example of giving the final person in the room a special task gets to one of the points in your book that I wanted to ask about. And it was, you have a very specific philosophy on thank yous and openings and closings.
Yes.
And so the closing. And so just, I'd love for you to briefly share your philosophy on things like how to open and how to close events.
Yeah. So I think openings, it's not just me, like studies show that openings and closings and a peak experience disproportionately matter. They're the things people remember. And so the opening moments and the closing moments are moments where an audience is primed to have kind of higher amounts of attention. And because we are trying to kind of get the housekeeping out of the way, we so often start with logistics. So you're at a enormous gala, everybody's there, they're excited, and the first thing someone does is they thank the sponsors. I was at a funeral, this is a true story, and the minister got up there, and we were all primed with emotion and very sad and grateful to be together. And he said, now, before we start, I just want to let you know that if you can keep your car in the parking lot here and just walk over together to the rec center, there's not enough parking in the rec center. And the reason I pick at it is because we don't think about it, but it affects the experience. And so I always say either find a way to communicate the logistics separately or do it second. And similarly with closings, don't end on logistics. Do them second to last. End on purpose.
Tell our listeners where they can learn more about the book and how to reach you.
Yes, thank you for the question. They can get the book at my name, priyaparker.com/the book. They can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Priya Parker. And I would love to hear your stories and your experiences and your tips and your magic on hashtag the art of gathering, and also your local independent bookstore.
And I could say that the perfect podcast title, GatherGeeks, for this podcast is unbelievable.
Completely.
Thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Me also.
David, that was a fascinating conversation. There is so much here for our listeners to dig into.
Yeah, I think it was really totally inspirational. I especially love the idea of the 15 toasts and having the person sing if they don't volunteer quickly enough at the end. I thought that was brilliant.
Right. And so for our listeners, the question is, what is going to be your 15 toasts? How are you going to come up with an idea that engages your audience from start to finish, that has your attendee move from, passively accepting all of this information to being a part of the conversation, having it be memorable for them, whether that's through conversations, through social dynamics that have been engineered through the format of the event. What is it that's really going to make this purposeful and get the message out that the organizers are trying to convey?
Yeah, and it's a lot harder than it seems. I think that's what she made it clear, that you have to really be strategic about it. You have to really think about how to make these experiences really, really important.
Right. So my one quibble with the book is that I feel Priya's coming to this from a non-traditional perspective. She has been working on conflict resolution and doing these big, amazing, important things. And I think in the beginning, event planners maybe get a little short shrift as just being concerned about logistics. And if there's one thing we know about our audience is that they are smart in thinking about these things, and what is the message, and how can you convey it through your food, through all these things that you need to check off the list. And David, your term educore, people are thinking in these ways, but it's always good to remind yourself of these things. And I think some of her ideas and frameworks are really fascinating. And sometimes you're doing it without knowing you're doing it as well.
Yeah, it's intuitive.
But I do want to give our audience credit, because that's one thing that BizBash tries to do, to realize that this isn't, we're not just all logistics people. It's, they deserve a seat at the table and are smart and strategic.
But I think that what's happening now, though, is that exceptional execution is a given, but it is something that is not as simple as people think.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So it's when things go off the rails that you notice it, but it's very important, because if you mess that up, the whole event falls apart. So Beth, what's going on at BizBash?
I want to make sure that everyone saw our Southern California Top 100 for 2018. This has just come out, and this is our list of the 100 top events in Southern California. So we're kind of stretching from San Diego through Orange County and Los Angeles proper. These are events that are, as we talked about, executed flawlessly, but also have strategic thinking behind them, from benefits to entertainment industry events. That's a big category for this particular list. And through trade shows and all sorts of events. And there are new events on this year's list, including some new number ones. And it's a great thing. We love to hear your feedback on them, what you agree with, what we missed, because, some events aren't on this year's list that were on last year. So tell us what you think about that. Yeah. And we're adding new ones as well. So great conversation. Give us your feedback on our social channels, but check that out on bizbash.com.
What's number one on entertainment?
Well, it's the Oscars, of course.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
It's really tough to overthrow that one. It really would be. But down the list, definitely some shakeups there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Beth. And I wanted to just mention before we end that this podcast is produced by Dave Nelson with the support of Claire Hoffman from our editorial team and Rebecca Pappas in our audience development organization. So thank you for making this possible.
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. If you are looking for a state-of-the-art learning management system, take a look at Digitel's newest platform, Opus DX. Opus DX offers the robust platform for event organizers and associations to manage content. To learn more and schedule a demo, email them at contactus@digitelinc.com. That's contact us at digitellinc.com.